What is the difference between a rector and a vicar? If you're an Anglican or Episcopalian living outside of the British Isles, then it's likely the priest who's in charge of your parish holds the title of rector. However, this is not the case in England, where some are titled rector, but most are titled vicar, as can be seen in television shows like The Vicar of Dibley, Grantchester, or Rev. Importantly, the title of rector or vicar does not depend on the diocese which they serve in, if the parish is in an urban or rural setting, their length of service, or whether they are a diocesan officer such as an archdeacon or a canon. A great example is to compare two parishes in the City of London that are a mere 0.2 miles from each other. St. Olave's has a rector, and All Hallows is served by a vicar. Why is this the case? Why do some English parishes have rectors, but most have vicars? To answer this, we have to go back in time before the English Reformation, to the history of how an English parish church was financed and how it operated. A parish was, and is still to this day, the smallest division of the church by which the spiritual needs of the faithful are met. All parishes are part of a greater structure called a diocese, overseen by a bishop. A bishop will assign one or more priests to a parish. Under canon law, the priest with responsibility for the parish is called an incumbent. Any additional clergy assigned to the parish are usually titled as curates. However, before the Reformation, an incumbent could have been a member of a religious order like the Franciscans. These religious priests wouldn't have just been operating under the authority of their local bishop, but also under the superior of the religious order, such as an abbot. Those priests not in a religious order and were directly under the bishop were called secular priests, a name that seems incredibly odd to us in modern times. In order for the parish to financially support its spiritual needs, there is a set of church taxes called tithes, and there were two types: greater tithes, which came from the fields and livestock, and lesser tithes, which came from labor and minor produce. The payee of a specific tithe accepted certain obligations with regards to fulfilling the spiritual needs of the parish. The payee of the lesser tithes was responsible for personally ensuring to the needs of the faithful by performing the sacraments and preaching the word. The payee of the greater tithes was responsible for ensuring the material things necessary for the sacred offices to be performed. This meant things like repairing the church's chancel, replacing vestments, or sacred vessels. The parish's incumbent, regardless of whether they were a religious or secular priest, were paid the lesser tithes. Secular priests would almost always be paid the greater tithes, while religious priests would never be paid the greater tithes. These would be paid to his religious order. Under canon law, whomever was the recipient of the greater tithes was the rector of the parish, the word rector coming from the Latin word to rule. If a parish was served by a religious priest, its rector was technically the superior of the religious order. Since the superior was at the monastery and unable to rule the parish in person, the priest was effectively a substitute for him. The word vicar comes from the Latin word for substitute. By being paid the greater tithes, the religious order would accept the financial obligations that came with it, like repairing the church's chancel. With that responsibility came a privilege called avowson, which gave the superior the right to nominate a new vicar who would be from the religious order and recall them at their pleasure. When the English Reformation occurred, King Henry VIII dissolved all the monasteries, broke up the religious orders while also selling their property. That property included the avowson they held over parishes where their priests served. These avowsons were sold to local landlords, which gave them the income from the greater tithe. This leads us to the bizarre title of lay rector, who is a patron of the parish. This lay rector took on all the financial responsibilities that came with being paid the greater tithes. But it also meant they got to name the new parish vicar. This didn't last forever. The system of avowson and patronage was dismantled in the 19th century, and the tithing system in the 20th century. Priests began to be paid based on the amount of time they had served. What also ended during this period was yet another type of incumbent called the perpetual curate. Many new parishes founded after the Reformation didn't have any tithes established to support themselves. As such, the parish priest was to be paid out of an endowment fund. With the reform of the tithing system and the ending of the avowson, the perpetual curates were retitled as vicars, which helped to simplify this incredibly messy system. To recap, what is the difference between a rector and a vicar? In modern England, there really isn't any difference in their pay and duties, and it is entirely dependent on the history of their parish. A parish with a rector very likely predates the English Reformation and would have been served by secular priests. A parish with a vicar was very likely either created after the English Reformation or had been served by religious priests before the English Reformation.